Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 47 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
We're back after a bit of a break, and let me tell you, we got two really interesting Star Doors to talk about today, Colin. Cannot wait to talk about the pair of really good ones.
I'm curious to know which ones you think the really good ones are.
We have only two official Star Doors we're talking about, Star Door 12 and Star Door 14, and then we have something that's just kind of there, and we have an awful piece of shit fan fiction that somehow made its way into the game.
See, okay, I knew that you were going to like 12 and 14. But I don't know which one you think is the quote-unquote awful piece of fan fiction, especially when it is written by the creators and therefore is not fan fiction, is simply fiction, but that's okay because this is all fiction.
Damn, that's pretty fucking deep, Colin. You know what else is deep? Our diving and delving into the narrative, plot, themes, and characters of the Kaseki series, and we are at the end almost of Trails in the Sky, the third, episode 47. We're not even done with the Liberal arc. We've gotten deep into the themes, into our discussion, and we'll be going deep again today.
Yeah, or as deep as we can anyway. Why don't we start with the thing that I think that you hate the most, which is Star Door 9, because nothing says Kaseki Superfan Podcast than obscene levels of negativity right from the start.
You're right. So, there's a couple things in it. The main one is the whole plot overarching structure sucks. It sucked 20 years ago when it was written, and it sucks now. It sucked before 20 years ago.
Why don't we remind our listeners what this Star Door is?
Oh, it's a Star Door with apparently no lasting value about Mira Maybell and her maidservant, Lila.
Yeah, so it's more than just that. It falls into this kind of tropey misunderstanding plot line in which Lila realizes... No, I'm sorry. Mayor Maybell realizes that Lila's acting a bit weird, and so decides... and notices her talking to a man. And obviously, the fact that Lila was talking to a man means that now she's going to get married. And because she's going to get married means that she will no longer be acting in the service of the mayor, because for some reason you could only be a maid / personal assistant if you are not married, which, okay. So what Mayor Maybell decides to do, the best course of action is to go to the Bracer Guild and to ask one of the Bracers to stalk her assistant to find out who she's dating. This is the weirdest part for me, and this is, to me, the most significant part of this whole thing, is that at first, Annalise sounds reasonable. She says, it doesn't seem like Lila's in danger. Doing this would be a huge invasion of the other man's privacy. I will not do it. And then, 2 dialogue boxes later, but you seem nice, so you know what? The Bracer Code is open to a lot of personal interpretation. So I've decided I'm going to stalk your personal assistant for you and get the lowdown on this man that she's going after.
Stalk and presumably use official city funds for this purpose, which seems like a breach of governmental ethics, if nothing else.
Well, we don't necessarily know that, because we also know that Mayor Maybell is a businesswoman in her own right. And has wealth of her own right. We complained about that in the first episode, about how the rich people can buy elections and all of that. So if we're going to be bitching about her private wealth back then, we should at least allow for the possibility that she's using private wealth to stalk her own people in this one.
I'll give you that. So it's a huge invasion of privacy. I like how Annalise does not seem to care, be also a huge invasion of privacy on Lila's part that seems to get swept under the rug. She's the maidservant to Mayor Maybell, and so she doesn't really count as a full person, or what say you in that regard. And to make a short story even shorter, Lila is not getting married. She's planning a surprise vacation for Mayor Maybell because she's working too hard, and Lila is concerned about that. This is a plot that could be resolved with 5 seconds of open and honest communication, and those plots suck. It's when a character sees someone where the situation looks like one thing truly damaging, which say someone they're into, a significant other, a family member, what say you, so they run off, not listening to wait, it's not what you think it is. And these kind of plots are, I think, intellectually lazy. That's the real issue with them. They're not complex. They don't rely on people in, say, honest disagreement or people who clash on a fundamental level. It's contrivances to speed things along, and there's not much interesting you can do without it because once they talk to each other, it clears up like that. There's no lasting impact, no lasting value. They don't learn anything about each other.
Well, I think that is not quite true in this episode. And I think we have to make.
Fuck off, Colin, you're wrong.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep talking anyway. Because, so we have this coming together moment in which Mayor Maybell acts like she knows exactly what's going on because she construed this idea that Lila's getting married, and Lila actually knows what's going on, but because Mayor Maybell has said, I know what's going on, assumes, therefore, that Mayor Maybell knows what's going on, but doesn't know what's going on. So they talk past each other for a little bit until it's revealed, oh, no, it's vacation that I was planning for you in secret. I guess it was kind of in secret, something like that. I don't know. But in any case, Mayor Maybell tries to be the mature person in some regard by coming to grips with the fact that Lila will have to get married at some point, and that, again, for some reason, therefore leave her job. But whatever. And then Lila has this weird thing where she insists that Mayor Maybell's happiness takes all priority beyond her own because Mayor Maybell is the center of her life, and that's the only thing that she wants to care about is Maybell's happiness. And Annalise, this is clearly gay-coded, suggestive, and Annalise goes ahead and reinforces that by screaming, "You look cute together!" and then runs out the door because apparently this is embarrassing to say. We should note that for the time that this game is published, this is new. Not completely new, but having healthy homosexual relationships in games was not nearly the thing that it is now. In fact, it's even kind of rare right now. So having this back then was pretty good. But in terms of the plot on its own, I find it lacking.
Let me counter you with a couple points, Colin. Okay, so one, power imbalance. Mayor Mabel is the person who signs Lila's checks. At least I hope to God that Lila is getting paid for this, but she undoubtedly is. So the whole, there's that. And they do seem to like each other, view each other as equals insofar as that is possible given their positions and stations. But that is still something, it's something that needs to be taken into consideration. One. Two, I agree this is LGBT coded. That is a strong subtext that is so strong it's almost basically text. It is paratext as opposed to subtext or what say you. But to me, it just seems like in these kind of media, we see a lot of women on women, quasi relationships where I don't want to say consummation, where I guess, official explicit acknowledgement does not come. And it's a way to nod, wink in that direction while still, oftentimes in this kind of media, especially in anime, have the women in question, be able to get with men, boy characters. And it's pretty different here because there's no love interest, main character, even side person for Mayor Mabel and or Lila to get with, but I don't think it's completely foreign to gesturing but not going all the way that we do see in a lot of light novels, JRPGs, anime, and so forth.
So I hear your point. I think that you're being a little bit too critical of this scene from that perspective. You're not taking into account the fact that this is much older than a lot of the stuff that you're playing and thinking about. And I think it's not like these are characters that are introduced only for the sake of saying, hey, look, we have some lesbians. We have gotten to know them over the past 2 games, and then this door is a scene dedicated to fleshing out their relationship a little bit more. So I personally don't see it as a bad thing that, okay, now they're starting to flirt with this idea that they are attracted to each other or what have you, because I think that in the grand scheme of things, then there is room to see these characters develop and grow. Unfortunately, I'll tell you now, we don't see that because this is the end of the Liberl arc, and then we're focusing on new characters. But at least in terms of the broader contours of Kiseki's storyline and how slow it is at building its narrative, I don't view this particularly as fan service or as a wink wink nudge nudge kind of a thing.
That's true. That's true. And it is kind of a bit of a shame we don't get to see where does it go from here. I think it's just on the cusp of them acknowledging to themselves, not each other, but to themselves, there could be something more than friendship.
Yeah. And the other thing I would point out, we've talked about this before. You bring up the fact that there's a power dynamic at play here. And clearly, especially in...
And age.
I don't think age is a factor. They're both
Mayor
adults.
Mabel says all girls your age experience romance at least once. It wouldn't be right for you not to do the same.
Kevin?
Implying the some age gap.
I'm sorry, Kevin. I talked to a 40-year-old man last week and said people your age know how to cook pasta and you don't, and that's weird. I don't think that phrase alone has to imply a significant age gap. They seem to be pretty close in age. Anyway, what I was trying to get at is that for the majority of working life, and remember that Japan is a little bit of a different place than we are, these kinds of workplace power dynamics turning into romances was not exactly uncommon. You were working in the same place, you got to know each other, and it was a frequent topic of discussion that like somebody might fall in love with their boss or fall in love with a colleague in a different department. My grandmother, or my step-grandmother, and my grandpa were in that situation as far as I understand. And given the fact that Maybelle is operating under the context that if Lila gets married, she will stop working for her, then this would imply that it's operating under that same broader older schema that seemed to equate working women with single women, and then once they marry, then they turn into homemakers. So I don't necessarily view the power dynamic in this thing as particularly odd. I just see it more as congruent with the worldview that the game is made under, which I don't agree with particularly, but I can understand it.
Okay. So, upon some research, I think you're right about the age gap because, Colin, I forgot a critical piece of information.
That Maybelle is also young?
Not only that, Mayor Mabel is 21 years old and has been in the mayor's office for a couple years by this point. I should have taken into consideration that fact.
Yes, you should. It's always good to remember the genre that we're talking about, right?
21 years old, an experienced mayor. Gray hair, I'm sure. Okay. But why is this door in here? Stepping back. Say the Raven's door, we got to see Agate as an instructor, as a teacher. But why this door?
I mean, it depends on how you really want to approach that question, because if we are thinking that every door has a contribution to the overall plot of Trails of the Sky the Third, I mean, half the doors don't belong. We already know that. This one serves the purpose of taking a relationship that we had seen over the past 2 games and develop it further in an interesting way. Do I think this is amazing? No. But I don't think that it doesn't belong here. I do think that the Weird Happiness Stone Moon door doesn't belong here, but this is better than that.
Who's experiencing this door? Is it all of us in the party? Is it Annalise?
I don't think it's Annalise. I don't remember the requirements to get into it, though.
It's not one of the people requirements, and that also raises a point. When we have those kind of doors, does everyone see them? Is it for the player?
Yeah, I think it's for the player, dude. Yes, obviously they walk in and says, "I'll bestow upon you a memory," but then it's bestowing upon the people who are in their memories they already have. Like, it's a gameplay device. I don't think we're meant to see, like, when Ren goes through Star Door 15, that we're expecting Ren to relive her entire traumatic past.
You would hope not. And also, I think I believe we don't see anyone talk about the doors.
No.
Do we?
Nope. Not once they first appear. After that, they are not mentioned again.
Do you think they should have?
No, I don't think you need to in this kind of game. This game is not very plot heavy. This game is about gameplay, and it's about wrapping up. It's about setting up new threads, narrative wise, and wrapping up some old ones, and basically giving the cast a send off from the player's eyes. So, in my perspective, just the way that this game is shaped and the way that the game functions means that we don't need as strong character awareness of what's going on. Now, if this appeared in, like, Trails in the Sky SC and Estelle didn't talk about it, it'd be fucking weird. But in this game, it doesn't strike me as weird.
And we can talk more about the doors as a concept in our retrospective
Yes.
review of Trails the Third, which should be coming out in a few weeks.
Yeah, we still need to work out scheduling. Spoiler alert for people, I'm traveling, and then I'm also moving at the end of the month, so things might be a little bit weird, but we're going to try to get out content on a normal pace. So we'll talk about that off camera. Do you have any
You know
other
who's
things?
also moving?
Said what?
You know who's also moving?
You?
Well, yes, but Alan Richard.
Well, he's moving on, I suppose, to some extent. Now, tell me about your feelings about this door, because you texted me when you finished watching it. That, long story short, this door kind of details how Alan Richard is starting a research group for the civilian side. He's no longer part of the army, and one of his troops is mad about it. And you texted me that you came into this game hating Alan Richard, and hating Alan Richard for 2 games, and now you like him.
So basically, one, I'm always glad to see someone take the skills they got in one career and apply them in a different setting. As a former academic myself, seeing Richard turn to market research, really a blow for all alt-ac careers in general. Two, I like how honest he was about himself, that he has regrets. He has remorse more than regrets. This line I copied, I'm the same man I was when I plotted that coup d'etat. That's a really honest, introspective assessment of
Yeah.
who he is. He's the same kind of person. He knows that why he did it, the spring it came from, it's still there. It's good he's not in command, he's not in the military, that he'd be too tempted. He's doing the same kind of things for more wholesome, constructive purposes, but he's not like, I'm a completely different person. I would never do that. I don't even want powers. Like, I did it out of love for my country. That same desire is still here, and I just have to live with that. I don't know. It felt a lot honest.
What I really like about that line, too, is that if you put it into the context of Sender, the soldier who's talking to him and asking him these questions of why did you leave the army? You know, Sender is very explicit that he believed in Richard's vision and that he was honored to work towards Richard's vision, aka plant a coup d'etat and, you know, remove the queen from power so that they can better fight against Arabonia or whatever. It's, in my opinion, it's kind of weird that he's still in the military, but we can talk about that in a minute. But what it means is that even though Richard will express things like, I led you down the wrong path, or I tricked you, or whatever, no, people did genuinely believe in him and followed him, and Richard knows that, meaning that if he was in that same position, not only would he be tempted to follow the same path again for the same desires, the same people that followed him the first time would probably follow him the second time, maybe even more, maybe a little bit less, but then they'd have gone through the entirety of the first coup d'etat and can learn from their mistakes.
And it shows that he knows the details of what he did wrong, but his ultimate goal, he still thinks, is correct and right. That Libero needs to be strong.
Right. He even says that when he was reflecting, like, what did I do wrong? He didn't say, starting the coup d'etat. He was trying to figure out what in the coup d'etat went wrong. Which is not something that you expect from somebody who on every other facet appears to be virtuous and patriotic and stuff like that. And I guess for him, it is a patriotic thing.
So my issue with Richard was more other people not treating him very gently.
People
But
were treating him very gently is your problem.
yes, yeah, but seeing him here, and he's like, yeah, I wasn't entirely wrong. I'm still kind of right. I like that character about him.
You like the fact that he's strong enough to... I mean, it's weird. Like, he recognizes that from a systemic point of view, what he did was wrong, right? He defends it like, by my actions, I made Liberl weaker, which was the opposite of his goals. But he also knows that the place where that came from him, and that part hasn't changed. So he chooses to remove himself, knowing that if he didn't, he would do it again. It's a complex picture.
And he regrets he made Liberal weaker. If he succeeded and Liberal was being stronger, have any like, oh, I'm using bad people. It'd be like, no, I did what I had to.
Yeah, he didn't seem that concerned about constitutional issues, right?
No.
He seemed concerned about national security and maybe domestic tranquility.
And even here, he's not concerned about constitutional issues. Nowhere does he say, I like subverted the will of the people or whatever. It's very outcome. It's not process based at all.
But something that I did think was kind of weird about this whole situation is you have Cinder, who acknowledges that it's now going to be difficult to be promoted in the army because of his participation in the coup. But he's still in the army. He was out of the army. He got re-enlisted in the army. The fact that he won't be able to get promotions means that the army knows he was part of the coup. But they still let him back in. And maybe I'm too stringent, and you can make an argument for the importance of reconciliation and all this kind of thing, but especially for the small amount of soldiers that were actively involved in the coup, they should not be part of the military anymore.
Colin, have you ever known me to argue on behalf of excessive clemency and forgiveness?
No, I know that you're going to agree with me on this. Normally, I'm the one trying to fight you down. But like, say, for example, I don't necessarily have a problem with pardoning them so long as that's the Queen's decision and they've calculated it all out that this is the best way to bring society back together. We can debate the merits of that, but if that's the decision, I can see it. I do not understand the decision of handing this man a gun and putting him back where he was.
Do they know? Do they know how much him and others like Sanders still believe in the Colonel and the Colonel's mission?
I mean, that we just don't have the evidence for. What we do know is that they know that he was part of the coup, and therefore he probably won't be promoted.
I could see them not promoting him because they think he's part of the coup, let's not invite more trouble. I would not be surprised, and again, this is pure speculation, if they didn't know Sanders and others still believed that they weren't just following orders for following orders, but they knew what was going on and wanted to do it. I could see Sanders lying about...
I mean, it could be.
To the higher-ups.
But then you also have things like Cassius Bright wants Alan Richard back in the military. That's what Sender says. That both Bright and General Morgan want Alan Richard back. And if there's one person you can say knew what was going on, it was Alan Richard, because he did the whole thing.
Yeah, but Cassius Bright is a soft-hearted bitch.
Okay. And seemed like at the end of this, I think it's kind of interesting what he's doing. So at the end of the Star Door, Alan Richard gets word that Red Constellation has entered the Eastern Quarter, and therefore he wants to go investigate what they're up to. The Red Constellation is a Jaeger Corps, a pretty famous one, and we will see them later for sure. I don't know if they've been mentioned before now, but they're important. And then right as Richard gets on the air...
Lynn, I swear to God, if you say this brings up something in Kuro...
Well, I could have said that about something else, but no, I'm not saying that about this. In any case, I do think it was interesting that Richard somehow knew that Alan was leaving, sent Zieg, therefore had Julia did it, to deliver a message saying, hey, you're investigating Red Constellation. You should also tell us the information. And Richard has this flippant remark how it's going to cost them a lot, but Cassius is still keeping that relationship alive. And in a way, to me, it's reminiscent of how the Liberlian military views the Bracer Guild as a partner rather than as a competitor, or at least now under Cassius Bright, they view them as a partner rather than as a competitor, because it's recognizing that this figure in a different sphere has a different role to play, but that can still be useful. And so he's reaching out and trying to create these lines of cooperation, relying upon previous levels of familiarity or patronage or what have you.
Yeah, so it's very adept at Cassius, and he's essentially sending Richard on a Bracer mission.
Yeah.
It's plausible deniability. It's getting someone semi-official into the area, so if Richard needs to have, say, high-level talks with anyone, that person in the government or military of Calvert, they'll know that Richard is not some private guy alone, but Libero has a stake in whatever is going on with the Jaeger, so that's good. But it allows Richard the flexibility and freedom that Cassius Bright could not. But when Cassius Bright went to Erebonia, it seems very similar to that parallels that we see in Star Door 13.
Yeah, so let's talk about Star Door 13, because I think this is pretty interesting stuff.
The ostensible purpose of Star Door 13 is to explain what was going on with Cassius in Erebonia in the early part of FC.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me about it is that it is written from the Erebonian Intelligence Division's perspective. Which reveals a couple of things. First of all, okay, so we have a Jaeger Corps called Jester that attacks all of the Bracer guilds. A reason for that is not offered. But what we are seeing is that the Intelligence Division knows that it's happening, doesn't really help out. The Erebonian military in general doesn't really help the Bracers out. They also are spying on the Bracers Guild's communications, because when the Bracer Guild in Heimdall reaches out to Liberl to get a high-ranking Bracer, the Intelligence Division immediately knows that it's happening and tells the rest of the military, hey, a big deal is coming in. We need to keep an eye on him.
So Erebonian citizens on Erebonian property are being attacked by rogue elements, and the first initial response that guides Erebonian governmental policy isn't that bad. We can use this.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say if you can say that the Erebonian Bracer Guild is Erebonian citizens on Erebonian soil, because Bracers move around.
Yeah.
And we just don't have the information on that.
But it's an attack on Erebonian soil, a threat to the, absolute monopoly on violence in Viberian terms of the state. And
this is true. And it's a non-state actor, right, acting rogue in their borders. And they only get involved in actually taking the Jaegers down when Cassius Bright figures out he's being tailed and turns it around on them and contacts the Intelligence Division to set up a joint operation. Which is genius from Cassius's perspective, because it takes the heat off of him and it kind of forces the Erebonian government's hand. On the other hand, it also shows that they were more than content to let the Bracers take care of everything on themselves until they were pushed to actually cooperate.
So I can definitely see, I assume that Osborn is in command of the Erebonian intelligence. It's a kind of modern, forward-thinking apparatus of power that he would definitely support. The Bracer Guild...
We know that just in terms of this scene, the Chancellor is informed of what's happening at the end of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much control he has of the minute-to-minute stuff at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, but I would imagine that he has more influence with the intel people than the aristocrats do. It's a modern state thing.
Sure. It's a good assumption to have.
The Bracer Guild is a separate, I don't say power, or it's a potential locus for anti-Osborne control because their values are pretty antithetical to his. So I think it makes a lot of sense why Osborne would not want them, Intel, to swoop in and save the bracers because this is getting rid of a potential threat, a potential rallying point, a potential source of investigation into him, his plans, and his people. His position is
I
stronger
mean,
with them being weakened.
I don't I don't know how much we can say that the Bracer Guild would be a locus of Osbornian resistance, given that up and down all of Zemuria, the Bracers claim that they will not intervene in state affairs.
Yeah.
Of course, in Liberl, we did intervene, but it was also at the behest of the actual government. It's not like Bracers are walking in there and doing regime change or things like that. Not that we've seen.
But think about what kind of values does the Bracer Guild espouse? It's
Okay, so the Bracer Guild espouses, more than anything, the protection of civilians.
that
Everything else is pretty much up in the air.
true, and even stuff about civilians is negotiable if you're an analyst and want to stalk people. But
Well, and that's why I'm saying, like, we can't really say that there's this defense of the law or defense of private existence or whatever, because that can be trampled upon. If you look at the vision of society that Osborne has, what is it? It's anti-noble, it's anti-feudalism, it's trying to bring people up to a more equal level playing
it's top
field.
down.
None of that is yes, okay, he has central direction, but none of that is inherently against the safety of the civilians.
No,
We know that it can be, but it's not inherently.
but I would say the values of the Bracer Guild is much more bottom-up communitarian cooperation at the local level, at least insofar as we've seen Bracers operate in one country only.
No, sure, I get that. I mean, and certainly what we see how the Bracer Guild operates, and this is true everywhere, is that people bring their petitions to the Bracer Guild, and then the Bracer Guild accepts or denies and then carries out the mission. If you want to call that bottom up, fine. But there's a lot of interlocking systems in any given society, some of which are top down, some of which are bottom up. Just because you're bottom up doesn't mean that you're inherently opposed to something else that's top down.
Holland, I would never insult the bottoms. So what more can we say about
I mean, something that I like about this door is that it gives us our basically only real view of Cassius Bright acting in his position as a super elite bracer without like being guided through the lens of Estelle and Joshua, right? This is just Cassius operating in its element. Not only does it explain some things that happen in FC, such as why they couldn't communicate with Cassius, it also shows why Cassius is so well renowned, which is not just the fact that he can fight well. It's also the fact that he is very good at improvising. He's very good at laying out plans that can solve huge problems. And this also reveals us a little bit more about Erebonian thinking. You know, they cooperate with Cassius the whole time. They acknowledge the fact that Cassius has not done any shenanigans, but seeing the skill of this bracer and seeing how effective he was, they immediately raise him up another level to their top dangerous level, meaning that anytime he's anywhere near, he must be kept under constant surveillance because of the threat that he may pose. And to me, this is a case in which I could understand from an Erebonian institutional military perspective why you describe him as a threat. From our perspective, knowing the man, I would not consider him a threat to Erebonia whatsoever, unless Erebonia provoked him.
no. But if he were to learn that the army was not inclined to help the bracers, I think that's what the intel says. I could see him changing his mind, perhaps.
Well, I'm sure that he already knew that. He had to have known that, because he was in Erebonia when they were asking the army for help, and the army wasn't giving it to them. That's one of the reasons why he got in contact with the intelligence division.
No, here it says, "Oh, I missed a. I thought it said the branches that had not yet been attacked had not requested, but no, I was inserting a word. No, yes, you're right. But
Well,
because he's not
speaking-
cooperating with intelligence out of the goodness of his heart. I still don't think he's fond of them or the army.
No, but I don't think you have to be fond of a country to not be a threat to them.
No, but learning what we did about Osborn in the store door, I would not be surprised if they try to take out Cassius, maybe, or
Well, like,
something
I
goes
think
on.
Osborn is a great comparison. Like with Osborn, you can definitely say that man is a threat to Liberl. Why? Because he tried to conquer it once during the orbital shutdown phenomenon. Cassius Bright has shown no bone in his body for aggression. He's entirely centered around defense.
Was Osborn in power in the 100-Day War?
No, he was not.
So that was the aristocracy that launched it.
Yeah.
And did he come to power as a result?
We will learn more about his backstory in future games. I don't want to get too ahead of this.
You know who also has heads?
Who also has heads?
Yeah.
That's your transition, is that Osborn has a head. And therefore, you know who also has heads? The members of Ouroboros? That's your fucking transition?
I think it's a good one. It's commonalities.
You know, I was going to make a transition, which was, you know what else I was right about? The fact that Star Door 14 was interesting. I'm not saying that was a good one, but it's better than, you know who else has heads?
Vanilla and people. Okay, so this Star Door is our first detailed glimpse into the inner workings of Ouroboros as a larger, unintended, society, not just the outpost of enforcers with Weissman at the head. We see the other Anguis and something of the Grandmaster a bit.
I mean, like, we see nothing of them, but we hear them. And the one thing that I do want to point out, just because I don't think you played with the voice patch, and I didn't either for this, but I do know for a fact that if you listen to the voice patch, the Grandmaster is speaking with a female voice. So even though she is referred to as a he by Campanella in SC, in like one line of dialogue, it is canonical that the Grandmaster is a she.
It's Chloe, I bet.
Totally Chloe.
Hiding the dark side. So, I thought it was really interesting. We got glimpses of this kind of libertarian bent or streak in the society from the Luva manga and from bits and pieces of SC, but it does seem to be a core tenet of the group that they join for their own reasons, and you can't. They're big on not forcing people, at least members.
Yeah, no, when it comes to enforcers, even when it comes to other Anguis, Anguis number 2 does make a point that the Anguis should have prevented Weissman from coming through with his plan, but, like, it was more in terms of, like, intervening with him as equals rather than forcing him or doing anything like that. There's a recognition of, like, a soft self-governance, but the primary value placed here is freedom. The freedom for the enforcers to do what they want, the freedom for the Anguis to do what they want, and then the Grandmaster takes that and uses it for her plans.
And one thing I want to bring up, it's a really interesting juxtaposition. This Let's Play comment, and I noted it too, they're not like Weissman, the other Anguis. They're not mustache-twirling, sadistic assholes. And they do express, this one says, they're surprisingly remorseful towards the casualties of the gospel plan. Not that the Arbiter...
Well, the Grandmaster is remorseful. I wouldn't necessarily say the Anguis are.
Not that the Grandmaster ever took any great pains to rein him in. So it's like...
No, she took no pains to do that.
It's interesting how she's like, not great, but didn't really do anything in her power. Is it just the logical extension of freedom? Weissman was free to try and free for others to beat him?
Like, the language that she used meant that, like, she calculated that an outcome like this, aka Weissman's death, was about a 50-50 shot for whatever Weissman was going. I think for her, the main importance was to get possession of the Aureole, which I had actually forgotten, but Campanella found it and gave it to the Grandmaster, which is like, whoa, mind-blowing there. It means that she now possesses that Septarion. And the language that she uses suggests that she regrets all of these casualties, but this is more important. And now we're moving on to phase 2 of this greater plan. How many phases there are, she doesn't reveal. But it seems to be a lot more of like ends justify the means, talking more on a much grander scale than just here's what's happening in Liberl.
So it's the end of the first phase of the Orpheus final plan. That's the overarching plan. The first part is the gospel. Second is Phantasmal Blaze. And that's, have we heard that before, or just generic fantasy trope? But Orpheus final plan. Colin, you do ancient stuff. I did ancient stuff. Orpheus. What's in Orpheus?
So Orpheus is a mythological character. In the story goes that his wife dies, Eurydice, and so he goes down to the underworld to negotiate her release. And he is given this deal that you can take her back so long as you do not look at her before you both get up to the surface. And he almost makes it up there, but then because he just can't contain himself anymore, he turns around and sees her, and then with a sad smile, she realizes she can no longer leave the underworld. That's him as a mythological figure. What's also interesting is that he is the center of a religious cult, the Orphics. And I don't know a whole lot about them, but it's very mystical. And the first commentary on a text that survives that we know about, the Derveni Papyrus, is an allegorical reading of an Orphic poem. So there's a lot of like mystical trying to understand the deeper realities of the world at play, that these concepts are brought up when something is described as Orphic or relating to Orpheus.
Death is a big part of the Orphic religion, from what I understand, and the Orpheus myth. I wonder if death, reversing this, stopping mass resurrection, is that part of the Orpheus final plan? Don't give any details, but based on your knowledge, is the name Orpheus final plan significant in and of itself?
So I will say that I had forgotten that this was called the Orpheus final plan. That being said, and I'm not giving any details away, but I think that the idea of thinking through the mythological figure of Orpheus and the values that you had just described is an important thing to keep in mind as we keep playing the games.
So Phantasmal Blaze, I assume this is going to be the Crossbelt arc if the gospel was Liberl.
I don't know how much you want me to give away on stuff like that.
Is this the developer saying, when it was released, we're going to do it's a new arc?
Yeah.
And just reading through some comment on the Let's Play archive, how this game is a really interstitial liminal game. It looks forward as much, if not more, as it looks back. Star Door 8 set up for the Eragonia arc, 3 and 15 for the Crossbelt arc, which I don't really get because 15 was all about Ren. 4 laid the groundwork for the Calvert arc, and that this Star Door spells out a big overarching metaphor, tying them all together.
Yeah, one of the reasons why the Moon Door with Baby Ragnard is so weird is that there's a lot of these doors that show off future things that's going to happen. That by now, after like 9 of the games, we've seen all the connections. And the Baby Ragnard one, I'm still like, I don't know why the fuck this is here. Something that I find really striking, having watched this door again, is that, in the course of the games, a lot of the characters here that are simply named Anguises, we do actually meet them. Not all of them, but we've met a fair number of them by the time you get to the end of Kuro. And what I found striking is that their personalities...
Really? Have you met any of them before now?
Technically, yes.
Colin, I do not like technically.
But it is technical. So
Wait, there was one woman. You mentioned how like there's someone that we meet in either this game or last game who's a complete
yes.
rando, and the devs are like, actually, it was this person. Dumbasses.
So two things. In Luva Monogatari, we did meet Arian Road, who is the seventh Anguis, and they even make a reference to how Luva was the only one who could fight her in swordplay. They talk about that in the Star Door, and we first see that in Luva Monogatari. So we've met her before, and then also, yeah, this mysterious woman that you see at the end, at the beginning of Trails in the Sky the Third, the first woman that Kevin flirts with, that is the second Anguis.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So that's interesting. But what I find very interesting is that there are characters that we first see in here that we do not see again for many games, but their personalities are all here. It has been well planned out that way. Like the fourth Anguis, you don't see him for a long, long time, but that personality is still right there.
Did they have a penchant for stating the obvious? That's the Orviole.
What is your penchant for?
No, I mean that's their first dialogue I found. It's them just shouting out, "That's the
Who is
Orviole."
they? Who are you talking about?
The fourth Anguis.
He talked. Unless I'm confusing it with the fifth. Either way, that doesn't matter. Um, there's a couple of other things that I thought were very interesting about this Star Door. I mean, the first of all, the Grand Master says the first pact has now ended, and the only pact that we've heard about, and I think this is what it's referring to, is the pact that Idios made with the Holy Beasts to protect the Septarians. Now, obviously, the Grand Master has the Oriole. Uh, and my question is, how the hell does she know about this pact? It's clearly pointing to the Grand Master knowing things that most people do not know. A lot of people have speculated that maybe the
What?
Grand Master is Idios. We don't have enough proof one way or the other, but certainly a popular theory.
Well, that seems weird because it seems to be pretty anti-ideals, or at least anti-church, which is not the same thing as we all know. The Grand Master says the bells in the west have rung, and the first pact applies no more. And that sounds like if then clause. If the bells ring, first pact is null and void. So there must be some prophecy or something. I wonder, or maybe it's hidden as an allegory within the scriptures. We know so little about the holy texts.
Or there are bells in the west of Zemuria, like in the city of Crossbell. Thus the name.
Is that I thought that's more center?
Well, all of like Erebonia, Liberl, Crossbell, Orid State, Calvert, that's all part of Western Zemuria. There's also the Middle East and then Eastern Zemuria, of which we haven't been to.
Okay, so it's like Western America. It still seems pretty big. Is it like continent size, or like are there any rough? Like how big is this place?
I couldn't tell you. The other thing that I wanted to point out, and this kind of goes to your point about uh, Ouroboros being anti-church. It's interesting because they're in conflict with the church a lot of the time. But also, I mean, the Grand Master has pointed out, it was like the cleanup about the Fall of the Libra Arc or something like that, right? Where she goes, I suspect the church will react to this. Let's leave it to them. We have other things to deal with. And that didn't seem to me to be a anti-church statement. It was a recognition that Ouroboros and the church have roles to play in society, and that's a place for the church to step in.
I can see that, like, they each view the other as, well, not the Fondias will fight, but we need the institutions to counterbalance. Except, from what we know of the church, it feels like they would kill all the Anguis if they could get away with it.
Yeah, I don't think that we can say that the church is pro Ouroboros. What I am saying is that the Grand Master does not appear to be anti-church.
Or maybe it could play devil's advocate. The church will act regarding that. Let us leave matter to them. Difficult, maybe take casualties, let them bear the brunt.
Maybe. I think we need a lot more data to really say one way or the other. The final mystery is that right at the end of Star Door 14, Campanella turns to the camera and speaks to us, the player, asking us to stop spying on them. And then the door ends. This is the only time in any of these 3 games that the fourth wall has been broken. What do you think about that?
It just seemed like a joke to me. I didn't put much thought into it, like just a wink to the player for comedy relief or something of that nature.
See, I think it's got to be way more. It's got to be way more deep than that. Campanella is such a weird figure. The only enforcer completely under the Grandmaster's control, but is even like kind of over the other Anguis to some extent. Like he has a direct line to the Grandmaster. I don't remember how much it's been talked about in these games, but we know from other games that he hasn't aged. He always appears to be the same age. Something weird is going on with this dude. And the fact that he can just turn around and talk to you, the player, when nobody else does, I think is just another weird thing that we need to keep in mind.
Yeah, so I'll keep that in mind. I kind of glanced over it, but what you say with what we know of Campanella, that does seem, on retrospect, more significant than I had thought.
Well, with that, do you have anything else about these doors you want to bring up, or should we bring this episode to a close?
Everyone involved has a head, and that could be significant for future games.
Sure, Kevin. All right, our next episode, we will have finally finished this game. Kevin's been a patient man. He really has been, because I've told him, you can't go into the final dungeon until we do this. And as far as I know, he hasn't actually done it yet. Now, maybe he has and he hasn't told me. But normally, he breaks and he tells me. So I'm guessing that he hasn't. And I've been the reason why we've been kind of slowing down a bit.
I have not. I've been working on the popular history book I'm trying to sell, and Colin, believe me, I'm sure I'll be blowing up your messenger as I get through the final
I
dungeon.
think so. And by the way, I've read a sample chapter of this book that Kevin's trying to push, and it's pretty interesting. So here's hoping he can get it out there. Why don't you take us out?
Until then, and after, because identities may be fixed, but not ours. I'm Kevin. That's Colin. See you next time.
My identity's pretty fixed. Thanks for listening to us, everybody. Bye-bye.